Joe Costello.
Thank you very much, Laskin Corla, and I want to compliment Deputy Burton for tabling this particular motion. It's an important one, and the establishment of a strategic investment bank is an important policy item for the Labour Party, and I think would be very much so for the country. The Minister Ryan, in his remarks, seems to be depending very largely on the Bank of Ireland getting the country out of the mess. And the first word after he deletes all the words after Dáil Éireann, which is terrible to see, outrageous. He commends the government for its actions to stabilise the financial system and notes that its policy have already delivered a cleaner, well capitalised and better funded Bank of Ireland that is now in a position to provide credit to support economic recovery and a new job creation. Well, Minister, if you believe that, you're in cloud cuckoo land. All of the banks are undercapitalised, including Bank of Ireland. It may be the best of a bad lot, but nevertheless, that's all it is. And if you think that the Irish economy can be got back in, the engine of the economy can be got going in a strong fashion, a robust fashion once again, with one single bank that is still in a considerable degree of trouble, you have another thing coming. But more importantly, what we have to look at the reality of the situation. And the reality of the situation is absolutely stark for this country. Unemployment has almost trebled in the last 2 years, from under 5% to almost 14%. The Life Register stands at 436,000, with 32% youth unemployment. Are we going to let that generation stagnate? Or are we going to let that generation immigrate? And if you look at what immigration is taking place, 40,000 people immigrated last year. The ESRI tells us that it'll be up to 60,000 this year. That's 100,000 in the space of 2 years. That's back to the very worst days of the 1950s, when immigration was at its worst and when the lifeblood of the country was being drained away because there was no employment in this country. And how has that happened? It has happened because of irresponsible banking, irresponsible regulation, and probably most of all, an irresponsible government. All have contributed enormously to the present crisis that we have. And the problem is, Minister, that the only response from the government that we have to get us out of this mess is to bail out the banks. That's the only coherent response. Over the last 2 years, we have heard nothing else. The mantra is stabilise the banks, capitalise the banks, give the banks a guarantee, and everything will be hunky-dory. That's the solution. Give that to the private banking sector that was very much involved in bringing the economy to its knees. We cannot allow the country to slip back into stagnation, as happened in the past, and the first priority for us must be to try and get the wheels of the economy turning again, and to stop the hemorrhaging of jobs, and to find new ways to create employment. And the Labour Party has its policy outlined in relation to a stimulus package, which we would intervene to retain existing jobs, to provide training, education and reskilling for those who might lose their jobs, and to provide incentives and resources for the creation of new sustainable jobs. But central to job retention and job creation is a reliable, steady credit flow. And that's where this comes in. The private banking system cannot provide that. Not only can they not provide it now, they didn't do it in the past. We have no indication that they are capable of doing it. They have been reckless, they have been greedy, they have been irresponsible. And the citizens in the street, as well as the corporate Ireland, require that steady flow of capital. And it is not there, and it is not coming from anywhere. While the banks splurged in the past, now they don't have the money to spend, and they're too impaired to be able to provide what is needed. But I think the principle is a key principle, that we can no longer allow the private sector to have total control of the purse strings that will determine the future of our economy. I think that's a critical principle that we must deal with. And we must provide ourselves with a sufficient flow of capital to our economy, to the citizen of this country, to the business, the small and medium enterprise, which are crying out at the present time for an injection of funds and cannot get it. That is a huge problem. And if you look at the small and medium enterprise sector at the present time, 64% of all employment is generated in that sector. More than 1 million people in this country are employed in that sector, and 50% of the entire population, working population of this country, are in the small and medium enterprise sector. And this government have not been funding them. They have not been putting pressure on the banks. The banks still are undercapitalised, and even then, further, the banks are not drawing down money that's available in the European Union from the European Investment Bank, where they could use for recapitalisation, not so much for recapitalisation, but they could use for the generation of new activities by that sector. So could I say that I don't think we have a choice in the matter. We have to look back at the models of the ICC and the ACC, which provided a good flow of capital to the agricultural sector and to the corporate sector in this country for many years. We ourselves in the Labour Party looked before at the establishment of a third banking sector. I think in a way this is roughly the equivalent of it. But what is essentially needed in this country is that the government asserts once and for all that it will be responsible for controlling the supply of money in the country, and that the only way to do that is to have its bank, or to have an independent bank that is capitalised, and this one would be capitalised from the pension reserve, and that its function, its primary function, is to ensure that the arteries, that the engine of the economy is going to be supplied with a steady flow of funding. That has not been done by the private sector. They have acted recklessly. For the future, we must ensure that this does not happen again.